Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Antandra, and today I'm going to talk about phase cancellation. So I have a brand new instance of Serum here, and we're using Voxengo span and signalizer to visualize what's happening here. So I'm going to go to the oscilloscope, and here's what the initial preset sounds like when I just play quarter notes, which I have programmed in a pattern. So every time it starts a note right now, it's starting at a random phase. If I turn this down, it's going to start at the same phase every time, which is right in the middle right now. But if I move this around, it would start at different parts in the phase. So that's what we're referring to when we talk about phase, is the cycle of the waveform and at what point in that cycle we are. So if I were to have two unison voices and turn down the detune a bit, and I have the random down, let's go ahead and leave phase right in the middle. Now if I play this, it's slowly drifting because the detune is just a little bit, but if I adjust the detune, it's going to drift faster or slower depending on how out of tune it is, because it's just going to be changing the pitch of one side. And the reason it's right and left is because in global, width is turned all the way to 100 here. So if I put it to 0, then they're in the exact same phase. Now if I turned up random all the way, they're going to be out of phase every time. Every time a note plays, it's going to be a different phase alignment. So if I turned up a lot of voices now and some detune, it makes kind of a more organic, almost pad-like sound. Now if I were to turn down random, it becomes more laser-like because they're all going to be starting at the exact same phase. Still going to be detuned, but listen to what that sounds like. So that's a phase overview using just the oscillator there. You could also have two oscillators and pan them left and right, or just have them centered. Let's pan them left and right though. Let's turn down the randomness, and now we have the same thing basically, but I could detune it here. So that's kind of the basis for a lot of neuro bass sounds or Reese bass, and a lot of like hyper saw, super saw sounds. So you can really get creative and make some cool stuff, especially when you start adding in effects and filtering and whatnot. So let's go ahead and set the tuning back to 0 here in the detune, the fine tuning. And right now both sides are the same. So I'll just turn this off and make this centered again. And we just have a mono signal. So now if I hide everything, you can see I just have a utility here. Now if I enable this, I've just inverted the right side polarity of the phase, so it's going to be 180 degrees out of phase. Now if I bring everything back up and play it, if you have stereo speakers, you're going to hear that it might sound a little bit more stereo. But if you have mono, then it's going to completely null itself out. It's going to be mute, which we're going to do in a minute as well. But hear what this sounds like. You can see it's 180 degrees out of phase, and the correlation meter goes into the negative, which, unless you're trying to do that, you don't want that to happen. because that means that when it goes mono like this, it's completely mute now. So if I play it, you can see the signals going in, but since it's flipped and it's the same amplitude, it just completely nulls out. If I were to toggle the left or the right, it brings the sound back. So you can use this to your advantage. Well, if I made this stereo, all of a sudden, then we'll hear it as well. So that's interesting. But if I make it mono, nothing. Now, for the stereo, if I were to create a group here, Command G, and then I flip both sides, and then I make a new chain, right click, create chain, and this can be dry, and this can be inverted. Now it will mute no matter whether it's a mono or a stereo signal. So let's try that. You can see there's audio coming in, but we don't hear anything. And even if I make this, let's see, so that's stereo. Oh, because we had that mono. Okay, so that shouldn't be on mono, but with these flipped and the dry signal, we get nothing. Now if I mute the dry signal, then we hear something, or if I mute the inverted, then we get something. But they cancel each other out even when it's stereo. So you can use that to your advantage, and here's how. So if I hide all this again, and let's go ahead and disable this, I've created a similar rack over here on this send, but I put in here an auto filter. So now if I turn up send A and move this around, we get 100% wet signal. And you can get a similar effect if you move this out here, turn that off, switch this to pre, turn the volume all the way down. Now we're not getting that original signal, and it's 100% wet signal. But with this rack, you can get that without having to have pre and having this turned down. One thing to note is if I start to turn down the send, then it's going to start bringing in the other signal again because it won't be fully canceling out. So keep that in mind, that it needs to be the same amplitude and 180 degrees out of phase for it to cancel out. Normally, if I just had the auto filter and this is set to post, and I turn this off, then we get a mixture of the two. So it's a neat little trick, and you can also use this when you're building drum racks. So if I create a new MIDI track, and let's go ahead and drop a drum rack on there. And if I enable these, and I have the returns and I have the sends, I could drag this same rack into the effect send. And now if I have like a sample here, let's see, any sample will do. So if I play this, let's go ahead and mute that for a second. Now if I go ahead and turn up the send A, it's going into this send. So if right now you can hear it gets louder. But if I turn this on, it doesn't get louder. And we can go here to this dry and put whatever effect here we want. So let's try this echo. And if I make that 100% wet, that's what we're getting. So it's really handy for that as well. People can use it in mastering as well. So if you just want to hear what your mastering is doing, like say I have Isotopes Ozone. Let's try Ozone 8. And say I just want to hear that, then I can use the same kind of effect. So let's go ahead and just drop a utility and group it, invert the phase, and then let's put the mastering over here. So now whatever I do to the mastering is going to be all we hear. Whereas if I had the mastering outside of that, then we hear the actual dry signal and the mastered signal. So it's a good way to see just the delta, or just the difference, because that's what it would sound like normally versus so it's just another tool for the toolkit, a way to get some perspective, or you know, you can use it for CV signal. So if you have like some audio coming in at CV, then you could invert the phase so you don't actually hear it, but you could have it triggering the CV tool or envelope follower, as I've shown in other videos, and that is another technique you could use. And I'm sure there's a million other ways you can use it, but another cool trick with phase would involve, say, the frequency shifter. So if I drop this on the serum effect, and let's go ahead and mute this drum rack again, and just hear the saw wave. So I'm going to turn down A, and let's hear that. So if I set this dry wet to 50, and I go ahead and start moving this fine tuning, it's going to make everything drift out of phase in an interesting way. Let's bring the meters back up. So I'm going to go here to master, click on those. Let's hide those and go back to serum and show them. And now I can move this fine tune. Whereas if the wet was all the way up, it would just sound like this. But since it's mixing it with the dry, you get that phasing. So it's another cool trick with phase. And there's just a million other ways you can use it. And just good to be aware not to stereo wide anything by flipping the polarity of one side, because then if you go to a club and it plays in a mono system by chance, which happens from time to time, whatever is flipped like that, it's just going to completely disappear from your mix. So it's actually happened to me before. So it's a word of caution. And yeah, I hope you learned something in this video. And until next time, have a wonderful day. I'm Antandra. Please like and subscribe for updates. Cheers.